Okay, so should we start?
Sure, we should.
We chatted for a while and we've tested the slides and so on. So now it's the time when we do really start the webinar. So hello everyone. Good afternoon from Sweden, where I am located. I'm Henrik Nolmark, Director of VREF. I think I know most of you. Many of you know me. I'm here on behalf of the VREF team, welcoming you all to this third session of the mini-series celebrating 5 years with the MAC program. So we have from VREF here, we have Jane. Can you just say wave? And we have Karin. Karin is busy chatting or something. And we have also Evelina, who is not able to put on your camera. So on behalf of the team, I'm happy to welcome you to the webinar. This is celebrating 5 years of the MAC program, which means celebrating a great program, a great initiative, and many projects. So we have just have for this mini series, we have selected just a few of all the projects that have been carried out in the first phase of the program. We're soon heading into the second phase of the program, or actually it's the third one, but a new phase of the program will be starting 2025. But we're not able to give you any more details on that today, but fairly soon we will be able to give you details around that and what it means. But this is looking back and celebrating the results of projects, the findings, the research, the knowledge, and the community. So we're also here to gather and see each other on the screen with or without cameras, but names are there at least. And it's so good to see a lot of people here today for this session. I will soon leave over to Winnie, and who is our moderator, Professor Mitula, located in Nairobi today, I guess.
Yes,
I know that you're traveling sometimes, so but I think I recognize
Not today.
your bookshelf.
I'm home.
So,
I'm home.
Yeah. So feel free to use the chat. And also I need to say that we have the session is we record the session. So please let us know if you have any objections to that. Otherwise, we think that it's consent from everybody to record the session, and the recording will be made available on the VREF website afterwards, not directly afterwards, because Karin needs to do some technical things before it can be posted, but soon after the event. Okay, with that, very welcome all of you, and over to you, Winnie.
Thank you very much, Henrik. It's always good to have this forum, especially when you attend a forum where at least 3 to 4, even 7 people, and then you also have new ones coming, and it's really good. It's one thing I appreciate in these forums. Today we want to make the forum pretty interesting. We've reflected, I know this is our last series in the 3 series of celebration, which has really been a celebration indeed. We are going to make it very interactive, and the interactivity will also make you do a bit of work. Sometimes we'll take you back to the chat and we block off a bit. You will just get it as a surprise. So be ready not just to listen, and then we'll also give you a bit of a break, maybe some 7 minutes or so to take coffee after the first session, which will be mainly keynote with Kuruziza and Pons taking us through. And then we get into a bit of interactivity, take a little break after that. Then we come back to our 3 presenters, followed by discussants. And then we will have again an interactive session, a bit of questions, but also trying to give you a chance to reflect on what more we could have done and how you feel about the general theme. So that will be what it is. It should be very interesting. And I must note that the topic which we are having today is a good one. Usually when we talk about planning and governance, each and every person can say something about it. So as much as it's going to be framed by Nkuruziza, and then the presenters will be highlighting issues, at least I'm sure all participants will have something they closely identify with. And that's why we are saying at the end, we want you to share some insights with us, and that will be also directed accordingly. So I want to be introducing Alphonse, who is going to be our keynote. I don't want to get into those concepts. He's going to really tell us what's good for us in this area of planning and governance. And I'll be asking you, Alphonse, to be loading your PowerPoints as I introduce you. Thank you. So Alphonse is an international transport planner, engineer, and an urban planner with more than 18 years of experience in research and practice. He holds a PhD in transport planning and engineering from the University of Twente, the Netherlands, and a Master of Science degree in urban planning and management from the same university. He has a strong practice and research background in sustainable urban mobility, road safety, urban planning, transport infrastructure planning, and development. He's currently the director of the new Center for Advanced Studies in Transport, Logistics, and Smart Cities at the College of Science and Technology of the University of Rwanda. He's also a senior lecturer of urban structure, transport planning, and engineering, and is also a senior urban transport advisor to the World Bank and a member of the board of directors of 5 public and private institutions in Rwanda. He's a board member of the Research Development Working Group of the East African Science and Technology Commission. Previously served as the Director General for Urban Planning and Infrastructure Development in the city of Kigali. And that means that Alphonse brings not just the theory from our classes and hidden centers of learning, but also from practice. So Alphonse, the floor is yours. Let's listen to your presentation. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Winnie, for that kind introduction. And good afternoon, all. I don't know whether you are seeing my slide.
Yes, your slides are good. Yeah.
Yes. So thank you for this opportunity for VREF to give me this opportunity to present as a keynote, first time to become a keynote speaker. So in my work, so thank you very much. So, but getting this opportunity to have a talk to the research scientists is a good opportunity. So as we introduced, I'm from the University of Rwanda and happy to be here. So I'm happy also to be given this topic of transport planning and governance, which I think is very key when it comes to research, but most important also to practice, where we need to make sure that at least what we do is we are doing it for the people. So I'll be starting my presentation by just saying, from the engineering perspective, you find that mostly transport planning, basically from others such as this, what is it? Is being defined as a field of government intervention that aims to ensure effective and efficient movement of people and goods. That's how normally why is it moving? Sorry for this. So basically, this is how it has been defined and how we have been always defining transport planning. So this is completely in a sense where we find that mostly people are focusing on transport systems. And this is always the case that only we think always transport systems. And our focus has been always as engineers to indicate, basically to be marking congestion. So if a transport system is not working well, we are thinking about congestion. That's what always we do. I happen to be one of the engineers and I still do, but you find what we are doing on the ground is just we're trying to, okay, we have congestion, let's build more infrastructure. So that has been always the case. But however, congestion cannot be solved by just building or giving more supply of infrastructure. So that's not possible because always that's how we think. So, and always that's a big mistake that we do. As of now, we are also trying to solve some of the issues in Kigali, but always people are saying, okay, can we build more roads, more lanes? That's the solution. That is always people think, but which is not right. And why is not right? Because people will always respond to that more supply. Because the more you build more roads, more expansion of roads, the more people you also you bring on board. So you just traffic on the road. So that's a big problem. And this is what you see, some of the streets in Kigali, whatever you do, you will find such problems. And this is not only unique to Kigali, it's mostly in all the regions of Rwanda, of the regions, countries. If you go to Nairobi, you go to Dar es Salaam, you go to Uganda, Kampala, and most important is that all these cities, I work with them. So in terms of practice with the World Bank, so I happen to be in planning with the World Bank, most of these cities. But this is what we see always when we move. So congestion is always, we think, okay, this. So now even Kigali, which was not less congested, is now getting more congested. Instead of looking at how this kind of vulnerable people could be going. So we have this kind of lines in Kigali where people are waiting for buses and trying to be online, but we never take control of seeing how do we plan for such kind of people. Instead, we think, okay, let's plan for cars. And this can also be demonstrated by looking at how the share of bikes and other modes, lower modes, getting much bigger when you go outside of the CBD of this is the map of Kigali, but you could see that things more people are cyclists, but hardly you see whether the infrastructure really meets the demand that really we see on the ground and the demand for people. Most of the majority who are just walking and cyclists. This does not just come by its own. It's because of the traditional tools that we have adopted, but also even ourselves, the tools that we use always. And these tools basically also depend on the current type of modeling that we do, which is only just thinking about most of the models that we use in transport. We just have the forecasting models, travel demand models based on existing travel patterns, ignoring people like the poor, the women, children, who are not, who can't travel or travel less. So this is a big issue. So the other point is that proposed transport interventions are typically scrutinized following cost-benefit analysis. This is always the big problem we have, because always policymakers, decision makers, they always want, okay, how much can we benefit from this project? So the CBR is the one that guides every planning process. And then the focus on models is also on the function of the transport network, with congestion always being put across on the front. Sorry for this, I didn't test before. It's getting, so the focus of these models, congestion on the network typically seen as the most important transport problem. And every decision maker thinks, okay, congestion, what do? We build more roads, build more flyovers. Unfortunately, Kigali, we are going badly now.
Alphonse, you could shift
Yes.
your PowerPoint presentation from, to just get it off playing to just doing it manual. Then it won't be playing games like that. Yeah.
You mean like stop share?
I think you put it on play.
Oh, on play.
To manual, yeah.
Okay, sorry for this.
Or you
so
can. I don't know how. Maybe now it will be stable because
no,
it keeps moving up and down.
Yeah, I don't know what's happened, but let me move. So basically, what is happening? This is the way that we've been planning always, which is not good. So if you look at the way that we've been planning always, we have been trying to analyze the situation using travel demand modeling processes, or identify the problems basically using the level of service. For example, they test the capacity ratio, most of these things, developing solutions, evaluating possible alternatives using CPA. This has been a big problem. So, and even implementing selected alternatives. This is the kind of normal processes that we've been going through, always using, which is not, I think, the best way we should be approaching. So, and
Alphonse, try to press escape. We have very good technical people on the chat here. Try to press escape to see whether it will be stable. Then it will shift to manual. I've seen David advise us to do that. Just do that. Try to put escape, and then we see whether it will be stable, because it's a bit disruptive when it goes back and forth. Yeah. Okay. So yeah.
Let's see whether it goes back.
So you can just be pulling the one you want. Just click on the one you want, and we just go on.
Okay, good. Are we there now? Do you see me?
Yes, we see. Okay. We see the PowerPoint.
Okay, thank you. So basically, this is the way of the tools that we've been using, always trying to model travel demand and identifying problems using the intensity capacity ratio, which is always like that. So this is the process we've been trying to use every time whenever we are planning. But when we try to see these rules of traditional transport planning that have been reading through almost of our planning process in the cities, you find that we are always predicting future demand for travel using travel demand models, identifying links, the missing links with lack of capacity, defining long list of infra, assessing costs and benefits, and then be able to shortlist the projects that come over with the which have passed the CBA tests, and then eventually we implement projects from this shortlist and trying to see which ones come first. So this has been always the practice that we've been doing. And if you look also, and this is not only maybe in Kigali, it is being done everywhere. So I think this description capture approaches most adapted mostly in the sub-Saharan African countries. If we go anywhere, this is the approach that always being taken, which I think is very unfair when it comes to using these models, because at the same time you find that these models just do not help us much. Instead, they make us be able to say, okay, let's improve the road network. And then while we improve the road network, we increase the number of cars using, eventually run into congestion, and then congestion becomes a failure, and then we again go back into the loop. And this is really given by an example in Kigali, where we expanded some of the roads. We anticipated to have dedicated bus lanes, and the cars occupied all those lanes completely. Now we are now fighting to have the DBL, the dedicated bus lanes, take over and have the buses run, take people, but it's very hard because the cars have hijacked the roads. This is now a big issue because even the roads are now more congested. So we see most of these things are really not good. And of course, this is what I've been saying, that this also results into continuous improvement of accessibility by car, or even the continuous decrease of accessibility for people without a car. This is completely always happens when we use our traditional transport demand modeling models, which are really, we think we should move away from that. So we need to think of different models that should be used. So, and this is what we think people can still be asking questions and say, maybe who is currently served by the transport system. So not thinking about congestion, not thinking about how to deal with congestion issues, but how many people can be served by transport system? How better can we serve our people? How better can we improve our transport systems in order to move more people? So maybe these questions can assist us to know maybe which tools are most important to use. In that regard, if we want to answer such a question, just everyone should be able to be adequately served by transport system. So everyone should be able to move to opportunities and be able to meet the daily needs. So I think for transport, for mobility, everyone needs to go to work. Everyone has to go and find ways. So in that way, so we think we have to think of different aspects or different model that we could use instead of the normal traditional modeling approaches. So in that sense, we tried to borrow the work that was done by Karl Martins, who has tried to work mostly on transport justice. And so Martins 2017 argues that the transport planning should be more people-centered, more people-centered approach. Like having a fair transport, this is more defined as a fair transport system that provides sufficient levels of accessibility to all in all circumstances. And possibly this could be even a human right, because everyone wants to really be able to meet the basic needs through access to ways of traveling to meet to go where services are provided. So now, so going through how Karl Martins defines a bit of this people-centered approach, you find that the normal way of defining transport planning as aiming to ensure that there is effective movement of people. Instead, here it's a field of government that aims to ensure sufficient accessibility for all through regulation, operation, maintenance, and improvement of the transport system. So completely moving away from the other part, the way we had been defining that, to a more of thinking about people-centered way of defining transport planning. And now that also takes us to another way of trying to approach how we model or how we do our planning processes based on people. So instead of the normal routine that we've been using, so when we are analyzing the situation, we could map possibly like accessibility of patterns by population groups, so different population groups. And when we're identifying the problem, we should also be thinking about how do we determine the groups experiencing accessibility shortfalls. Where do we don't have more accessibility for people to move? When we are designing or solutions, then we have to think of the transport interventions if transport is a cause of accessibility shortfalls. Land use and service delivery interventions, the lack of distribution is a cause of accessibility shortfalls. So we think from the other end, not the normal way we've been doing of predicting and providing solutions. So evaluating possible alternatives here, instead of using the CBA analysis, we could use cost effectiveness analysis to assess solutions, contribution to reduction in accessibility shortfalls. And here in implementing selected alternatives, so we aim mostly to make sure that we build, operate and manage transport services, making sure that services are able to reach people. That's most important. Here I give an example of what happened in Gary some time back when we are trying to engage public to make sure that people really take place, make their own opinions about how they want to move during the master planning process of the city and implementation. So this was a team of the city that was really engaging. How do they want their transport network, the transport of the state of Kigali, how do they want it to be? What should be given priority? And this engagement bring people on board to see what is happening. Fortunately, I was part of this group that was working on this. And what you could see is that people were engaged completely in trying to think about what they should do. How do they want to plan their own city? How do they want to see transport system being planned? What comes first? By engaging through focus groups, through technical advisory groups, through stakeholder engagements. All this happened to make sure that we engage people to see what they want in their neighborhoods. What do they want? That's what was most important. If you look at this also, you see, I give just a bit of some findings we got from our recent study that sometime 1 year ago that was done under the funding of VREF, and thanks to VREF for funding this study that we did. We came out with some findings, looking at what the mismatch between what's happening in Kigali or even in Blantyre, the state of Blantyre in Malawi. So we found that in Kigali, We have very good planning documents, very well written. You can't imagine they are very, very good, but the problem is implementation. When it comes to implementation, that's another aspect. So implementation and planning are completely opposite. So, this is being shown. We have the master plan, a very good master plan in Kigali. There is also the transport policy states very well all the transport justice elements. You find them very well there. But when it comes to implementation, you never know whether these documents are viable. So that's the problem. So the mismatch or the discrepancy between policy and practice is a fundamental question. So you find that some, like the master plan, is indicating that the city should have a transport system that gives a more public transport-oriented city, need to have to establish a complete transport network or system, needs to create a sustainable transport network, a system that is more green, everything, even the targets for each of the modes, the share between public transport and 70 to 30. You see, it's completely giving the lower modes like walking and cycling and public transport a big share. But when it comes to implementation, it becomes a big challenge. And this can be shown by some of the activities that are being done, like this kind of road, although it has the walking and cycling infrastructure alongside, but it's very hard for somebody who is from top down to cross this major road. So not user-friendly in terms of walking and cycling, and making sure that it's well embedded to make sure that everyone should be able to access. And this can also be verified by other planning processes that are happening. You see, what here you couldn't find the walking and cycling facilities all along, despite that now the car infrastructure is well elaborated there, but you do find the walking environment. The cyclists do not find their own way of even though Kigali,
sorry, who is interfering with this?
Even though Kigali is trying, but we find that there is this big issue of infrastructure that is not really meeting the needs of the majority of people in the city. Also, the same thing that's happening to the city of Blantyre, where you find that at least most of the people, the stakeholders that were engaged, we also found that at least they know a bit of the transport justice elements. But there seems to be where you find that at least when you ask the policymakers, the professional, the transport professionals, find that they share the understanding of transport justice, but you don't find this dimension being really is lacking in all perspectives. When you go even on the ground, you don't see it being implemented. And this is not only in Blantyre, but even if you go to the city of Dar es Salaam, if you go to Dodoma, if you go to other cities in the region, Kisumu or Nairobi, you don't find all this happening. So it's across, this is a major issue that we have. And the main finding that we get from this stakeholder analysis that was done during the study that we did last year is that there is a big discrepancy between policy and practice. What is in the documents very good, well elaborated, but when it comes to practice, the translation is not there. So there is a need for analytical tools, knowledge, and skills to translate policy into practice that could include justice considerations. So this is a very key. It's an aspect that policymakers and practitioners need to give much attention, but also researchers to make sure that they give much attention to see how this can be embedded into the planning process, but also in implementation, where it is very key. So there is a need also for change of mindset towards public transport and non-motorized transport. This is a big issue, as someone who is now combining both academic but also practice. I see it much if I go to Dodoma, if I go to Dar es Salaam, if I go to Kampala. There is, so the mindset about public transport and anonymity is being seen as a mode for the poor people, which is not completely at this stage where we should be. So there is a big work that we need to do from the governance perspective to see how this mindset change can be done, especially to decision makers, to transport professionals, but also to even citizens themselves, to the city inhabitants. Very, very important. So So we did also some analysis using the quadrants that were also based on the Karl Martin's model on transport justice. When we did this, we did some accessibility versus potential mobility modeling, and we did see that if you look at here on this right scatter plot, you would see that the cyclists, the people walking completely, and those cyclists are on the lower quadrants. So basically, you find that the potential accessibility by car is about, you see that the car is on top completely. So you see that at least potential accessibility by car is about 110,000, because accessibility to jobs is around, the population that is meeting that is around people accessing more than 50% of the total jobs. By car, you can make access to the car almost 110,000 jobs. So while you see the number of jobs being potentially reached by walking is only 8,400 jobs. And for cycling, it is even 41,600 jobs. So if we make a comparison, you see that access by car is almost 13 times better off than people using non-motorized transport. This is really gives us work that we need to really see what's happening is not true, because majority of the people in our cities, for example, in Kigali, we have almost 52% people walking, and we have people cycling. When you add all of them, we have 67% of people walking and cycling within the city. So majority of the others are using motorcycles, and others, the minority, only below 10% is using cars. So now, when we go to plan, it is already biased completely. So there is a need that we need to check this. And if you go
5 minutes, Alphonse, you have 5 minutes.
Yeah,
5 minutes maximum.
Sure. So if you see what's happening here also on transport service within Kigali, you find that people reaching be able to the coverage of transport within 400 meters is 34%, compared to even 100, 800, although it is still advisable 800, but it's still far distance, especially in cities where it is very hilly. That's even much more length, but 66% still within 800 meters. So which should be really checked. When you come to Blantyre as well, the city of Blantyre, you find the same trend. You find that NMT is the access to jobs is 10 times more than the access by non-motorized transport. The same trend that is happening here, accessibility to jobs versus the potential mobility. You find the people using cars are the ones on the top, completely accessing most of the jobs than the more. So there's a need to work on justice in transport, make sure that those majority of people can also be able to reach, especially the low-income people. So where I'm concluding this, there is some points I want to make. For this, that will be also opening to their colleagues, so I'm going to give us more work that they have done in different cities. There's a need for establishment of multi-stakeholder decision-making process to strengthen transport governance, inclusive planning, and sustainable urban development. This is it's very key when you are talking about this transport justice. There's a need for everyone, transport governance, inclusive planning, multi-stakeholder decision-making, put it together, because I see it every day when we go to the planning in the cities. This is very important. There's also a need for the establishment of a high-level technical advisory board or group that is able to enhance transport planning and governance to ensure ownership, synergy, and coordination of key actors towards transport planning process and execution. So these technical advisory teams are very important, especially when they understand they can be tailored to this justice planning in transport to be able now to advise accordingly to the policy makers and decision makers to be able to take the float. There's also a very big need to promote participatory and integrated approach for transport planning and implementation, and ensure sustainability in this long term. There is also a need to have an extensive platform communication campaigns to support participation strategy and citizen engagement to reach all levels of population. So much as we deal with the more hard work of building more infrastructure, whether for the cars, whether for the walking and cycling. But there's a big change of mindset that has to be brought through working with the policymakers, decision makers, and the middle technical people within the ministries, within the transport agencies, to be able to work together, to be able to have understand, especially from the governance perspective. The last point on political will and strong leadership. This is very, very important. When you want to make a change in the transport planning area, or even the governance aspect, we need to make sure there is a strong political will and leadership that makes and takes it, this transport justice aspect, to be able to move forward. Otherwise, it becomes very complicated. And we have seen it even here in Kigali, even in other cities that we work in, that this is very important. Political will and strong leadership is very key. So, so this is what I can say while I'm concluding, but I want also to thank my colleagues from different universities. We did together one study that was funded by VREF, the University of Wits, the University of Technion, the University of Malawi, University of Cape Town, and the University of Rwanda. So we did some work on that, and thanks to VREF for funding on that. And I would say thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to just open up this more discussions. Thank you very much. Back to you, Winnie.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Alphonse. That was really wonderful. I know we won't have much time to go back and forth because we are going to have an interactive session with your paper, but I just want to highlight a few elements just as we go ahead. You know, the issue, you quite emphasize the issue of traditional approach and Martin's approach. Sometimes the questions I'm always left with when I look at that, the emphasis is on mapping and really knowing the travel patterns. And it seems to be both ways. But one would assume like for if you go for really low income, you know, the type of people we are, the vulnerable, I keep wondering what mapping would say about them and how that mapping would help in terms of bridging the gap. And then you've quite highlighted and emphasized the issue of discrepancy, you know, between policy and practice, which is actually the heart of governance. And we need to unearth a lot. And there are quite a number of reasons in literature why there would be good policies and there is no implementation. But I've seen also in the chat, I think Jackie Klopp is raising an issue of are there some unique experiences from Rwanda? Because Rwanda seems to be a very unique country when you look at how enforcement, we tend to assume or see, those who have been to Rwanda, that enforcement is comparatively better in Rwanda than elsewhere. So when we look at this subject of discussion, is there anything unique in Rwanda that one would say in like strict rules of sticking to dedicated lanes, issues like when you look at the problem, or did problem arise, as Klopp is asking, with meeting public transport demand when the minibuses system were transformed? Some of those insights can be very interesting. I know we might come back later to them, but I think is critical to look at that. And again, when this issue of bias, you know, bias, and when you talk about the cars are performing better in terms of the reforms that we are doing, I think in recent times there is a lot. If I see your quadrants and the graphs you showed, there is we tend to assume there is change, but maybe we don't have much data. If you look at the ITDP inverted, you know, pyramid, where you now have walking going on the top and the rest, that reverse. I wonder whether there is some insights in that. So I think you can just use 1 minute or two just to observe, and in particular the Rwanda insights, if at all, in line with what Jackie was trying to raise, and then we'll get to the next stage of this discussion. Thank you. 1 minute or two for you.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Winnie. And thanks to Jackie Klopp. Rwanda, in terms of basically what we have in Rwanda is quite, of course, I do agree. In terms of enforcement, Rwanda is very good at enforcement. So it's very good at enforcement, but when it comes to translation of policy documents into action, we have a big problem. We have a big problem because that getting what is in the policy to be able to work on the ground people don't take much attention to seek advice of the documents. And then at the moment they try to find the own means. Completely, like if there is a big issue, like when you say like public transport, an example of public transport. Public transport was reformed to better in terms of getting people be able to have dedicated bus routes. So routes were being dedicated to operators, and now I'm operating on these routes. But recently we went back because there was lack of attention to the operators, and the operators were not able to meet the demand of the population, given that also they are not able to meet their operating costs. And that thing shifted, most importantly, shifted. More people were using more motorcycles than buses, because operators were not getting in more buses. And with that, then there was a shift to say, okay, now let's allow again, go back to the old model of allowing everyone to operate in buses. And that brought a chaotic thing, because that does not even conform to the policy. And we had gone even better than before. So with that now, the issue is public transport is seen as a business than seeing as a public good. And in that aspect, say, okay, Nairobi is doing it like that way, it's working, but they don't know whether Nairobi is doing it better or Kampala is doing it better. So whether enforcement, but that enforcement needs to go with completely a good practice that goes. So access, so the buses are running on the major corridors, they don't have more feeder networks that come. So, and that is the policy stated very well. So I think that's very key. Yeah. One of the examples where the enforcement is good, but at the same time, translating what is in the policy and be able now to plan better is not done on that aspect.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that response, Alphonse. Now I want to call upon Jane in collaboration with Karen to take us to the next brief session before we have a short break.
Thanks very much, Winnie, and thanks, Alphonse, for a very informative and excellent talk. Our thought here, Winnie and Karen and I, is that we'd like for each of you to come in on the chat and share some of your own reflections and thoughts. And the point of departure for your thoughts would be the following. Based on Alphonse's talk and also your own work, what would you consider to be some of the key issues or factors or dimensions that are needed in order to strengthen transport planning and justice, transport planning toward more justice in SSA cities? We'd just be interested in just a few key words that might be your thoughts and reflections in response to Alphonse's talk. So please go into the chat and let us know what you're thinking.
Yeah, please go into the chat. We will take a few minutes for everyone to write down their reflections. And we will summarize this together with a recording that will be shared within the coming weeks. Thank you.
Thank you. It's your quiet time to get to interact with the chat. I think we can do that in the next 5 minutes. Should be good.
And our thought here is the issues of equity and transport justice. They are across the board, no matter whether you're engaged in planning around governance and planning, or if you're interested in learning more about user patterns for certain groups. This is the kind of issue that we kind of all think about. Oh, yeah. Okay, I'm going to repeat it. Yes. I'll write the question in the front end. So
I noticed that someone came in just the second after we told about the interactive session we're doing right now. So we have just heard Alfonso Nkuruziza's keynote speech, and everyone participating is sharing their reflections in the chat. So for you who just came in, I suggest you just follow the chat and the posts made there, and we will pick up on the general program soon.
Thank you so much.
Good. Yeah, it was you.
Yes.
Bamiji, is that right
Yes.
pronunciation?
Yes, it is.
Nice to have you here.
Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. And now I have also posted our question in the chat. So even if you're late, you can still share your thoughts.
It's great to see all your contributions coming in. Thank you, all of you.
A little addition there. Some really good thoughts coming into the chat. Thank you. So Winnie, you can come in anytime it's suits you to pick up some of the ideas in the chat whenever you're ready.
Okay, I think we are doing well, and we won't stop that process. I guess it should continue and continue and continue. They are not going to disappear. But
Yes,
as I can see, the main focus is really revolving around how do we capture people's needs. People's needs. How do we map? How do we ensure that we don't focus on cars, but we focus on people? And when I see that as the dominant running thing, include stakeholders, include people's perspectives, stop being biased, understand people better, and all this, then one gets back to our data issue and the challenge of data in Africa, because all these things seem to be focusing towards having data that can be used to inform. But I see us again shying off a little bit from how do we crack this issue of policy, lack of implementation, where we have policies and we are not implementing. I don't see a lot of focus there, but it's also a very critical element. Sometimes people reduce it to mere saying that there is no money, but I think there are even some quick wins that may never need money. So your thoughts, if you have thoughts about this issue of the bridging this policy and practice gap, which is very relevant and critical to planning and governance, it would be really good. I know issue of enforcement of laws has also been emphasized in the chat. Is it an enforcement issue? If we say policy, there is this gap between policy and practice, as Alphonse was highlighting about, they are not implementing some things that they think they should implement, when we think that Rwanda is where to go and see implementation. What's the issue there? Because you would think that in Rwanda, most things, like if you plan, the government plans efficiently, we should be able to see the outcome. Let me see if I have anyone here who can say one word or two. Jackie Klopp, are you there? You had quite a number of inputs as well. Just say something, yeah.
No, I just would say, I would just say that, can you hear me okay?
Yes, yes.
Good. I would just say that all of these reflections are really powerful and a way forward. And clearly there's a need to keep finding multiple strategies to address this gap. And one thing that we didn't talk about was sort of the political economy and budgets and investment. So you have these wonderful plans. You can even have good consultations. You can even have the, best practices, cutting edge practices in the plans. But when it comes to actually putting money into infrastructure and programs, the money's going somewhere else. So I think that's, something we're going to have to track. And so I would add the word accountability here, that we need to build. But actually everything I think that's in the chat is really important, multi-pronged strategy to address this problem. And I just want to thank Alphonse and the team for wonderful work. Thank you.
Thank you. Gladys Nyachio, do you have any observations to make? Gladys?
Thank you very much. Yeah, just like Jackie has said, there are issues that we also found in our study to do with accountability as well as documentation that would help in this process. When you want to implement something, of course, without the support of the political, the people, the leaders who are in the political arena, it becomes very hard because they also have their interests. So yeah, that is a factor that maybe we need to explore more.
Thank you. The Chito, any observation to make, Chito, before I go to Jen? Chito?
Thank you. I think for me, it's also, I was thinking of external factors that come into play within our cities. For instance, in the presentation I'll be giving, we find that funding comes in for a big road and governments will take it up. So, and they're in a hurry to get quick wins. So I think it's the realities on the ground sometimes are quite complex, more complex than we would imagine. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. Back to Jen. Hand it over to you, Jen.
Thank you. Thank you so much, everyone, for these very insightful comments. I have one question to Alphonse, but also to those of you who are working in education, educating the future transport engineers. Alfonso, do you integrate some of the results of the research you've carried out in your teaching programs to kind of encourage the new generation of planners to leave the predict and provide role and start to consider broader social goals? And I'd like to hear comments also in the chat if people know of situations of renewal of educational programs for the future of urban planners.
Yeah, thank you, Jen. That's a very good question, very excellent question, actually. So the whole thing starts from the university. So what do we teach our students? So that's a big problem. Yeah. So these students, when they graduate, are the ones going to offices, and they're the ones again coming back. Okay, so these modes of transport. Walking and cycling are not modes of transport. So I think this is an opportunity for me, having worked in the practice, having been in practice and coming back to teaching. So I think my students are better than me when I was still a student. So at least now they can understand that walking and cycling is part of a major component of mobility, and also a major component of transport system. So at least that one is being emphasized. And also there is a trend that is also changing. We are also trying from the center to train most of the government technical teams to be able now to understand what should be done. But of course, they don't make decisions. And now that's the whole process that we need to work out. But the most important is to build an engine of young transport professionals that are now going to be able to design systems that are more people-centered or more people-centered approaches when they go back to work. And the good thing that's now also happening is that even these students, they are being given assignments that we have in the industry that they work on, especially when it comes to the challenge even the industry. Why walking and cycling is not when they go to professional internships. So we are seeing that happening in several areas. For example, we have part of my students in the University of Rwanda who are now in the World Bank internship in Zambia, in Malawi, in Tanzania. So they are now challenging. I just get also feedback from colleagues saying students are asking why NMT is not given attention. So, and yet it is a big component of transport. So that kind of curriculum. So changing the curriculum that we have been always using is very key and very important, and that can shape the future of leaders and the governance in the coming years. So during my time when I was studying, I didn't know that walking and cycling was a mode of transport until I went to the Netherlands, where I did my PhD, and I saw people walking and cycling, and I thought, oh, so are these modes of transport people should consider? So I thought only the mode of transport is a car. If you don't have a car, yeah, yet everyone used the bike to take milk in the village. But we didn't know that it is a mode of transport. We thought only the mode is a car. But now I think there is a need. That's a smaller take. I don't think it is really. So we need, it's Alphonse, but I'm not the only one teaching the students. I think there is a big chunk of us here, or the people here, the professors, the planners. We need to make sure that students are being taught the right transportation that we should now take over. So with that, we can be able now to make change into the practice. And I very well, Jane, I think that it's coming out very clearly. Now I find it that graduates who come from already have some skills around that. And also the best thing that we've been doing, we have been bringing people from international organizations like World Bank, like JICA, but JICA not very well because they're also trying to do their work, mostly also on car orientation, but at least to come also give talks to the students to be able to give them what is on the field and what they should give emphasis to. But I do completely agree. We need to change curriculums. We need to make sure the curriculums are really more people-focused, transport planning focused curriculum that really can make change into the future. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Jen is done. I think now is time to break. I want to give you very few minutes, 5. I think 5 is enough for you guys to grab coffee or water. Yeah, 5 minutes. Let's reconvene at 11 minutes past the hour. Just 5 minutes to stretch and do something small. Let's all clap for the keynote speaker. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Alphonse. You are still with us up to the end. So let's break and convene again in another 5 minutes.
And thanks for all those great comments in the chat. Really, really insightful. Thank you. Bye.
Okay. So welcome back. I hope we are all back. We are back to get to our second session of this forum celebration, where we are going to have 3 presenters, and we are going to begin with Gladys Nyachio, who is going to be presenting for us, focusing on processes of transport planning and governance for urban sustainability in sub-Saharan Africa. These are studies that we once listened to when they were rolling out, but now they've been advanced, and I think the presenters can talk more candidly to the topics. So I'll just briefly introduce Gladys as she puts PowerPoints on. Gladys Nyachio is a sociologist and a senior lecturer at the Faculty of Social Sciences at Multimedia University of Kenya. Currently, she is the head of the Department of Sociology, and she has more than 10 years now of experience in transport research, and her research interests are mainly in transport and mobility. Areas of focus include border motorcycle dynamics, road safety, public transport, gender issues in transport, walking as a mode of transport, and mobility. And lately, she is into transport governance, which she's going to be talking about. She has successfully led several funded projects as a consultant and principal investigator, and authored journal articles and book chapters, as well as presenting papers in both local and international conferences. She's recently concluded a VREF funded project, which she's going to talk on, focusing on the same topic. And she has a passion for mentoring young scholars. Her most recent work was on a research funded by FEAR Foundation on health costs of motorcycle taxi crashes in Kenya, and a journal article on the influence of ineffective governance on motorcycle sector in transport industry in Kenya. Nyachio, actually, her PhD focused on motorcycles, and I'm glad that she's still quite on them. So Gladys, the floor is yours to get into your new area of governance. Sometimes I do say that the new people see it better than some of us who have been in it for too long. Go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I hope you can see my screen.
Yes, it's
Sorry,
on.
I'm not able to put video just for the sake of stability of the internet.
Okay.
So I'll be looking at the topic that you're looking at, processes of transport planning and governance for urban sustainability in sub-Saharan Africa. We'll look at the experiences from Kenya and Malawi, and that is my team. It was such a great team. So I will start by looking at the key terms, although we will not go so much into details because of time. Actually, this would have required a whole 1 hour to talk about, but I'll squeeze it to a few minutes. So we really do not have a universal definition for transport governance. It actually depends on what we are looking at. The example you can see there is from infrastructure services. I know Kirolia will be talking about infrastructure, and probably she'll give us another definition, but OECD says that it is the process, tools, and norms of interaction, decision-making, monitoring used by government organizations and their counterparts with respect to making infrastructure services available to the public. Now, this is just for this infrastructure. If we are looking at port transport, we would define it differently. So maybe at the end of this all, we may come up with our a proper or one universal definition for transport governance. Another term that will be important for our understanding is transport planning, although Nkurunziza has already looked at this. It is a process, of course, looking at evaluating and implementing plans, projects, and policies. So at least that one has been said. And because this is on the topic, sustainable transport, I will use one of the definitions that have been given by UN high-level meeting that was there in 2016. And they say that sustainable transport is the provision of services and infrastructure for the mobility of the people and goods, advancing economic and social development, benefit today's and the next and the future, and also looking at the issues of minimizing carbon emissions and environmental issues. So why is it important? It is important because the cities, for example, that we are looking at, Mzuzu and Kisii, are growing very fast, just like all the other cities in Africa that are urbanizing. And these issues of transport planning and governance are quite complex. and they involve processes and a number of steps that include multiple stakeholders. So we are looking at a very complex issue here. So the study, the aim of the study was to compare governance processes in sustainable urban mobility in the two cities that I've mentioned, and to interrogate the role played by governance actors and dynamics in transport planning for sustainable urban mobility. After conceptualizing, which took us forever, the study narrowed down to decision-making and implementation of walking infrastructure. And this one actually enabled us to identify the planning and governance processes, because there was no other way we were going to get to know what goes on here. And it was a qualitative case study design, so you can imagine the amount of literature that we got. So context is that Muzuzu is a city in Malawi, in the northern region. It's actually the hub there, with approximately 1.7 million people in the city. And for Kisii, we're talking about 0.5 million people daily making, commuting daily and actually being found in the city. And of course, for both cities, walking is a major mode of transport. And surprisingly, we found that in the study, before 2017, walking facilities were, walkways were quite limited. And if I forgot to mention, we narrowed down to walking infrastructure in this study. So our examples will be looking at walking infrastructure. So it's after this spotting activity that the city woke up to the fact that they didn't have walkways. And even up to now, we have walkways, yes, but they are still very limited. So you can see an event can lead to something that was not there. And this is something that actually is happening in most of our African countries, where when something comes up, then we work towards that. So for the study, we looked at 3 interventions in Kisii and 3 in Muzuzu. You will realize that most of them were walkways that came up because there was a carriageway. But because some of them were World Bank projects, that was a requirement. That is why we could talk about walking interventions in Kisii and Muzuzu in this way. So, of course, we know that transport planning is linked to very many other things, including land use. So I know the discussant might focus on that because she's in transport planning and land use. So I will just move to the next so that I'm not caught up with time. So in order to explain the planning process, because we try to go into smaller details, we adopted the Mayer and Miller urban transport planning model here, where we look at diagnosis, analysis, scheduling, and monitoring, just to follow what happens. We wanted to look at how walking facilities or infrastructure are planned for. And this is what we found. In diagnosis, ideally, the process starts with identification of the challenges and the needs in transport system. And this is, of course, in order for us to understand the existing situation, just like Professor Mitula mentioned, the data. So in Kisii, we were told that this assessment was done, including the SWOT analysis. And most of the information was actually brought by people from out there. For example, there was a key informant that said that before the construction of the Nyanchwa Link Road, the people used to walk for longer, and they used to just walk on the side of the road without any walking facility. But this, after the intervention, the road is now has a walking facility, and the distance is reduced. So, but it was not clear whether other data was used at this stage. So we're talking about making decisions without necessarily having the information that we need. So the next process in the planning that we found was on analysis and evaluation. So of course, analysis looks at the feasibility options or alternatives that are there. And also options are derived through technical and policy evaluation. So what we found is that because Kisii does not have a spatial plan, it was very difficult for them to do the policy evaluations, and also other policies like a walking policy did not exist. So you do not have something to look to measure it against. For example, does it align with this policy or that? And also the technical evaluations, it was not clear whether data was being used or even models to assess how each option would perform. For example, when looking at walking versus cycling, we would need to know which one would perform better, but we did not have evidence for that. Mzuzu has an actual spatial plan, but the information we got could not tell us exactly how that was used. And in both, the processes were based on department plans, budgets, ceilings, personal interest by politicians and ward councillors and also MCS for Kenya. And also the governor's manifesto influenced a lot because it had to be incorporated in the 5-year plan for the county, where they pick the projects from. The next step is, of course, as I talk, I know you don't think that it is linear. It is never linear. So the next step is scheduling and budgeting, where detailed project timelines and financial plans are developed. So for Mzuzu, this information was largely missing, and there was a lot of explanation. People had left office. That indicated that there was a loss of institutional memory, because if you leave the office, information, it shouldn't leave the office. And in Kisii, we also found that as much as walkways were scheduled and budgeted for, when there was an budget overrun, they are the ones that were sacrificed, from what has just I posted there as a response from one of the key informants. And also for both cities, there was no specific budget for walkways. So it was not like they are budgeting for a walkway. It was coming as part of the carriageway, and it could be sacrificed if the carriageway doesn't have enough money. So also there were challenges in Kisii due to the terrain. Also political influence. As you'll realize, we found that the Nyanchwa Road, the link road, the position was actually influenced by a politician because he had properties and interest in that side, as much as people also said that they needed that road. So, and also actual road construction was influenced by maybe funding. Okay, that was just a summary, what I was supposed to do. So the last stage that would say ideally, for planning, for transport planning, would be the monitoring and evaluation. So for Kisii, we found that most of the projects that were including walkways were World Bank projects. 2 were running, and two had been concluded and one was running. So for them, for the World Bank projects, they were audited 4 times. And even before they start, they were also audited. But for them, and also for the local programs or interventions, they also audited, as we were told, 3 times. But it was hard to get that information like in paper and to look at it. Of course, you appreciate how hard it is to get some of this information. And this takes us to the issue of what methods do we use to collect some of this data from the field. So from Mzuzu, road audit was done. Surprisingly, through the Road Traffic Directorate, where satisfaction surveys were also done under that. So for governance process, I decided to separate them as much as all the processes that we have talked about, all the processes that we've talked about have the governance aspect, as you will see. So under governance process, we looked at several issues. Of course, I wouldn't say, okay, that one, it's not important for now. Strategy development, ideally, would be the first thing. So policy formulation is a very important step. Just like the poll that VREF has just taken and the points that we gave, we mentioned some of these issues, policy formulation. And because these policies are not there, prioritization becomes a challenge when you want to decide for walking or for whatever mode that you want to talk about. So we managed to look at what existed in terms of policy in Kisii and also in Mzuzu to see how that would probably influence whether we would have walking facilities, because there are some policies that would support it. So for Malawi, we had the revised 2019 National Transport Policy, and also the infrastructure sector, this IFRA SAP that you can read from there, and also the Malawi National Transport Master Plan. The only problem is that we could not most of the time establish what is it that, whether it was directly influencing the decisions that were made. Although for Kisii, the integrated strategic urban development plan that is where they could get the departmental plans or projects for the year that they would put under the annual development plan, while of course the county spatial plan was missing. On the stakeholder, this is something that has been mentioned by several of us. The criteria for consultation, we found that depended on the type of project that was being undertaken. We asked that question. And we also found that from the responses in and out of government and outside, we found that some people thought that public participation was not meaningful, and because notices were put out very short notice. And I know Professor Nchito will be talking about this because we looked at this in another project. She'll be highlighting a lot on the type of participation that is there. So if they found that it was not really something done meaningfully. So the people's ideas may be not incorporated and even rushed to the point that they were not able to discuss anything. And maybe the people don't know what even they're talking about. So from Zuzu, this was done mostly, councillors from Zuzu were found to be very influential, and they were the ones representing the people. And they brought the community issues to those people who are making the decisions, including themselves. Also, this study found that there was coordination and cooperation. The example we had was from PPPAS from Kisii Polytechnic, where the Kisii Polytechnic was given a Cabro machine, and they make the Cabro machine so that they make the Cabro for the walkways that were being done in Kisii. On the issue, regulatory frameworks are...
Gladys, you have a very few minutes left. It's like your time is on.
Yeah. Oh, I'll take just a few. Of course, the regulatory frameworks are totally important. It's a very serious governance issue. But in both cities, we found that there were provisions for walking facilities, but it was not really done. Funding and resource allocation, I think you can refer to what I said in planning, but in this case, this is where the decisions are made. What do we fund? What don't we fund? This will be shared so we can look at it later. For the implementation, of course, the different types of projects, for World Bank, it was implemented in a slightly different way. Same way where for Mzuzu and in Kisii. Of course, monitoring, I've said a lot about it, so I may not be able to repeat, but this is all where the problem is sometimes, because we tried to look at the issue of accountability, which was actually affected by documentation. So when there is no document or you are not able to read anything, you are not able to follow that track, and accountability gets lost in there. So in conclusion, transport governance process is dynamic and interactive rather than strictly linear. The findings underscore significant governance challenges, including lack of policies and plans, funding delays, political interference, and inadequate prioritization of non-motorized transport. That is from Kisii. So by adopting structure and integrated planning, enhancing transparency and M&D, documentation, fostering stakeholder collaboration can offer solutions. I will choose to stop there and just show you a few snaps. That's from Zuzu. And that's for Kisii. Thank you very much. It's a lot, so I couldn't say much.
Thank you, Gladys. And I must really congratulate you and your team from when you began thinking through this project. And you know, it's so many components, and that's really how governance and planning is. When we listen to you, then we know how complex it is and probably why it always fails. So now we want to listen to the commentator, Catherine Gatteri. Catherine, I'll just introduce Catherine. Catherine is a lecturer and a researcher at the Kenyatta University, Department of Construction and Real Estate, School of Architecture and Built Environment. She's trained as a land economist and an urban and regional planner with research interest in land, transport, and governance. As a researcher, she has participated in research activities in urban and regional planning, largely focusing on land management, transport, and governance. Her research work in transportation and governance include mainstreaming inclusiveness in urban mobility related projects in Kenya and Zambia, and walking and freight delivery operations. So that is Catherine for us. At least Catherine, I hope you are on board. Yes, I can see you. You can go ahead with your comments, please. You are mute.
Thank you, Winnie. I
Oh,
will.
good.
Can you hear me?
Yes, now I can hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Can you hear
Okay,
us?
thank you. Thank you, Winnie. I can hear you very well.
Okay, go
and
ahead.
I would want to switch off the video because I've been thrown off 3 times.
No
since we
problem.
started.
No problem. All right.
All right. Thank you. So thank you, Winnie, for that introduction and for leading us so far. I would also want to thank the VREF team for funding this project and for facilitating us to be able to be listening to this session at this time, and for the engaging discussion of transport planning and governance. And thank you, Dr. Nyatio, and your entire team for delivering on this research and trying to unpack the complex transport planning and governance processes. And the topic is very relevant and an important point of discussion, especially in the global south, where we face major transport development challenges. The aim of the study was to compare the governance processes in sustainable urban mobility in the 2 cities and to interrogate the role played by governance actors and dynamics in transport planning for sustainable urban mobility. The comparative approach analysis from the global south perspectives provides a good case study to understand the complexities. The team has done a very fantastic job of reviewing the process. However, I have a few observations, and I start with the definition of the transport planning. Where the researcher is of the opinion there are no universal definition of transport planning, and observes that the definition is subject to the aspect of transport or mode that is being addressed. And maybe that this is a problem where we do not have a clear definition of the transport planning. They adopted a rational planning definition, which completely ignores the spatial planning aspect integration into transport planning. And so there is need to bring out at least 1 or 2 other definitions of transport governance relating to the wider urban and regional governance and planning, as transport is a regional planning issue. So we need to adopt a multidisciplinary approach or definition based on what is lacking, especially the spatial design component. And then we move on to the linkages to transport planning. And the study has noted that processes of transport planning and governance are complex, and they are shaped by social, economic, environmental, organizational, and political factors. And these processes influence transport outcomes. And the point of discussion here would be, how do these complexities play out in governance processes and planning? How do they affect the decisions and implementation of the transport projects? And further, the processes involve a number of steps and multiple stakeholders such as local and national governments, private sector actors, civil society organizations, and international development partners. Again, the point of discussion would be, how do these interactions of the various stakeholders play out in governance processes and planning? What are the various roles that they play, and where do they complement or contradict each other? When we have so many actors in the same space, are they complementing each other? Are they contradicting each other? Do they enhance the planning process? Do they hinder the processes? Do we have duplication of activities as a result of the many stakeholders? And would the regional transport planning and governance multi-agency be a solution, because transport infrastructure is a regional sector? I know Kunzis has tried to allude to this, and he had a suggestion or a recommendation on how we can go about this. But do many actors enhance or hinder the process? Then the study narrowed down on a decision-making and implementation of working infrastructure to enable interrogate planning and governance processes in the study area, which is a good thing because we are here because of working. And in this space, governance structures will vary depending on national, regional, or municipal levels. Unlike other modes of transport like vehicular and rail, working tends to be at a local level, thus closely related to urban design. Do the master plans of the various case studies, the available master plans, do they cater for walking as a mode of transport? What policies exist that support walking infrastructure on the 2 case studies? I didn't see them. and at the transport plans or decisions made at the land use planning stage to cater for the space for working facilities and the design. And if they are not catered for, if we do not have the space for walking being catered for at the land use planning stage, where then do you put the walking infrastructure? I know we have these issues of retrofitting initiatives where walking infrastructure is an afterthought. And then we have seen there's no integration. And then we will have spaces where you have the walking and then the space disappears. And then you have to continue at the next level where there is no space to put in. And that is because it is an afterthought. And then the study has used adopted urban transport plan process, which has guided the study. And this is a rational planning process. And that should be the norm, or that is the ideal situation. But what is the situation on the ground? Policy formulation is a fundamental step where overarching goals, priorities, and objectives of transport governance are established. Once the policies are formulated, are they followed through to implementation other than the two case studies presented? And is this the norm or the exception? This beautiful process from the beginning, the way we know rational planning process, does it work really on the ground? And then we have the example, I give the example where the study has noted that policy evaluation is not possible without policies or plans. And in a situation like you see, which does not have a spatial plan, how is an analysis and evaluation done at this level? Then we have the budgeting process, and there's no budget for walkways in both cases. What is the reason given by the policy makers for not budgeting for the walkways? And is it that it is not a priority? Do they appreciate the importance of walkways as a transport infrastructure and the number of people who walk? Because we know in the global south, people walk because they have to walk. People walk as a necessity. It's not a luxury. It is not a sport. It is, we go to work and we have to walk. So why is it that they do not? This from a perspective of Dr. Anchio and her team engage with these policymakers. Then the monitoring, here the various institutions that are key players have their own internal mechanisms. However, the specific details or tools used were not provided or explained in details. Why is it that we do not have monitoring tools? And then how do you monitor the plan when you do not have the tools? And
Catherine,
then in both cases, working infrastructure were World Bank funded mainly and partly by the government.
Catherine, your time is like a minute. You have a minute to go. Your time is out. You have a minute to go. Your time, your 8 minutes.
Okay, so I will. What was the then I'll go to the conclusion. What was the political implication of the processes and the developments? Who owned the various projects? Is it the national government or the municipality? Was there any conflict between the various agencies? After donor support, has there been increased interest from the national government to continue on the maintenance of the various projects? Or the methodologies of consultations? Do we have any creative methods so that we can be able to follow that, to be able to engage the stakeholders more? And then in conclusion, we've had so many conclusions, but I would say my conclusion is, how do we integrate policy and practice? Do we go from the curriculum? Because if you look at the curriculums of the urban and regional planner, we do not have transportation planning. We go to the engineering. We do not have working for NMT. And these are the two curriculums that would cater for this. Do we say we go there and then we catch them young? And then I go back to what Professor Winnie keeps on challenging us to stop saying we need to engage the policymakers, but to develop solutions on how to engage them. Any ideas from the study on how we can engage and change the mindset of these various policymakers so that walking as a mode of transport is given more priority as opposed to the motorized transport? Thank you. It's a lot. I know I can't unpack all of it, but thank you so much. And the team has really done a fantastic job.
Thank you very much. And we encourage all of you, including you, Catherine, to start answering the many questions you raised. So we need those questions answered, and that is why we are here. So people get onto the chat and begin answering those questions as we listen to the next presenter, who is Liza. I'm just I'll give you a brief. Liza, you can post your PowerPoints in readiness to present. So Liza Rose Sriola is an associate professor at the African Center for Cities, University of Cape Town. Her work focuses on the relationship between hybrid infrastructures and governance, with a specific interest in technological transitions, urban staff, and fiscal assemblages. Lisa runs several research projects at the African Cities Center, including areas related to platformization of urban economies in Nairobi and Somalia, health and climate change in Cape Town, Kigali, and Accra, and energy transitions in Cape Town. She teaches two of African City Center's core models as part of the Masters in Sustainable Urban Practice, including one class on financing cities and one on urban infrastructure. She regularly consults for leading local and global organizations. I think we couldn't have anybody better to talk about this. Liza, you are on stage now.
Winnie.
Go ahead. Thank you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you very well, and the
I have to
PowerPoints are good.
apologize. I have to apologize for my voice, which I lost yesterday, but is coming back. So I was asked today to speak about infrastructural planning and governance, and what Jane asked me to do was to draw together some of the concepts that I've been thinking about in my recent work, but also in the collaborative projects that we have been having at the African Center for Cities over the last 5 or 6 years. This presentation also draws quite heavily on a series of projects that I did as part of VREF MAC program, including, let me see if I can get to that slide. No, it's not working, the slide moving.
Oh, it's not moving, and it did move on the pretest.
It did move in the test.
Pull it down and push it back again. Sometimes it works that way.
There we go.
Oh, good. Excellent.
Is this the first? Okay. Yeah, there we go. So I've been thinking a lot across a range of projects, several of which were also as part of the VREF MAC program, on how we conceptualize the question of governance and infrastructure. And there has been some really, really impressive work that has come about because of the relationship between urban studies and what is often called the infrastructure turn in both geography and urban disciplines. And it's created incredibly fertile ground for thinking about this kind of infrastructure, materiality, governance, power nexus. And it's also thrown up some, I think, a little bit challenging questions. I know that these are questions that might depart a little bit further from the sort of policy practice interface that many people on the call are interested in. But I wanted to raise them because I think it's important to bring them into this space. The first is obviously the more basic question of how infrastructure is governed. And this is what we were speaking about earlier, the sorts of diverse actors that are involved, informal, even illegal, different levels of the state, et cetera, that are involved in making decisions around how infrastructure is planned, financed, operated, et cetera. But then there's also questions about whether governance is its own infrastructure. And this is also something that's come through a lot, whether we can start to see the state itself or the way in which governance networks assemble and become durable as a sort of infrastructure of the state. And this work has also turned its attention back to the state in ways that is very, very helpful in the African context. And I'll get to that a bit later. And then finally, there's been the question of, does infrastructure itself govern? And this is really about whether kind of technology and materiality and infrastructure systems have power, whether they exert power through their material forms. And these questions, of course, come from science and technology studies, but have really started to ask innovative, or have really compelled us to think innovatively about how we see and study infrastructure assemblages. If we take this as a starting point, it actually offers us some really kind of difficult ways into these debates, particularly because both infrastructure and governance become kind of unstable objects. And by unstable objects, I mean objects that require us to be very, very careful in how we theorize them. They can't just be taken for granted. We can't just say infrastructure and assume that we all know what we're talking about. They're concepts that require us to do a lot of work to frame and bound. So 4 conceptual approaches that I've found for studying infrastructure, and there are more concepts that I've deployed, I'm going to go through today. And one of the reasons why I think kind of diving into concepts is really important is because we actually all use concepts in our work. We sometimes don't make those concepts very explicit, or we sort of use them in ways that we may not explain fully. But I think there's a lot of value in being able to talk carefully about concepts and question the way in which they've been given to us, particularly by scholarship from the global north, and then how we use them to make sense of what we see in the world. So I'm talking about urban theory here because I think that how we understand phenomena and how we frame problems really shapes our relationship to solving them. And so for this reason, there is actually a relationship between kind of theorization and practice, but I won't go into that in a lot of detail now. I'm going to start with thinking about decentralization, move into some tensions between hybridity and heterogeneity, move on to the focus on the urban state, which I work on a lot in my work, and then finally questions of uncertain futures. Of course, I'll move quite quickly, but I'll try to use examples for each one that's mostly from the MAC work that I've done over the last 4 years. So multi-level government or the kind of conversations around decentralization have really sought to make sense of the tiers or spheres of government that influence urban and infrastructural systems. Of course, in Africa, we know that there are in many places, there's 3 levels of government, but there are also places where we see 2 or even 1 level of government. And these levels of government come to play out in really interesting ways because almost every level of government comes to shape urban areas and infrastructural systems, often playing different roles in the same infrastructural system or holding responsibility for different aspects of infrastructure that come together. Leading policy suggests that decentralization, or the movement of functions from higher levels of government to lower levels of government, brings about optimization, local autonomy, even more democratic decision-making. And this is because it's assumed that infrastructural decisions that are made closer to people are going to be better decisions that are going to be more effective and optimal. The nature of urban mobility, however, requires us to think really carefully about the extent to which decentralizing to very low levels of government actually makes sense. And Catherine and Gladys touched on this earlier. When we start to think about large cities, which are experiencing a growth far beyond their jurisdictional boundaries, we need to start thinking about how vertical and horizontal systems come together. And by vertical, I mean tiers and spheres of government, and by horizontal, I mean the relationship between governments on the same level. So think about municipalities that are adjoining. So when we start to think about that kind of coordination, we are faced with a very serious question, not only of how we plan, but the politics of this. And we often think there's a lack of plans, but actually the issue might sit in a nittier, grittier dimension of trying to negotiate the kind of political tensions between levels of government. Of course, when we think about the benefits of decentralization, we also have to take into account that many important transport decisions, for example, industrial policy, import regime, standard setting, actually require to be set at a national or even sometimes regional level. And so this tension between the importance of the local, but also the way in which transport systems are actually regional and metropolitan really needs to be thought through. Here's an example of a Senegalese town that I worked in where the jurisdiction for roads ended promptly at the end of the road, and then no road continued there. And this is an example of why we really need to think about horizontal linkages between municipalities if we want to have a continuous road that actually connects spaces together. The next concepts I want to talk about, and I think many of you might have encountered them, are both hybridity and heterogeneity. So there's been a whole lot of exciting work on infrastructure governance that has started from the proposition that we do not have in African cities centralized networks where everybody experiences the same level, type, and form of delivery. We don't have universal coverage, but we also don't have one centralized actor that delivers everything. So think about minibus taxis versus trains. And so what we see instead is a lot of heterogeneity in the service delivery pathways. So heterogeneity refers to diversity of technological artifacts that come through in how services meet people. And so you can think about a boda boda versus a minibus as a sort of technological diversity or heterogeneity. And this concept has been used a lot to kind of explain and valorize the sorts of ways that many poor people, but also the middle class in African cities access services in light of often failed utilities and collapsed centralized networks. In contrast, hybridity, which is often used interchangeably with heterogeneity, but is very much not the same concept, is actually the sort of developmental process where these heterogeneous service delivery networks come into contact with legacy systems, with centralized networks, and in fact, co-constitute or transform each other. So in terms of planning and sustainability of urban systems, we actually need to be grappling with hybridity. We need to be thinking about the changing relationship between heterogeneous technologies and the network. And in doing so, we also need to take very seriously the way in which re-centralization is taking place. Not everything is informal, decentralized, or distributed. And here's an example in Mombasa where we see the revival of large technical systems and large-scale investments. We see the new freight, we see the expansion of the airport, a southern bypass road, an industrial area, and expansions to the port. So all big mobility and logistical infrastructures coming together. And this is not a story that's often told in Africa, despite the fact that it is actually driving a lot of urban development and a lot of challenging governance issues. How am I doing timing-wise? Okay. The next concept, which is one that has really, really helped me in thinking about African cities and governing of infrastructure and planning urban futures, has been urban statecraft. There is a lot of talk about informality and non-state actors in Africa, and this is really important. It was a very, very necessary corrective to years of focusing too much on government in the 70s, 80s, and early 90s. But now we have almost lost our attention to the complexity of how states work. This is not entirely true. Francophone scholarship has kept this, but in the Anglophone Academy, we really have lost this. And we've lost the importance of states as actually something that's very important in Africa. So beyond the question of the sort of rescaling of the state and the decentralization that I spoke about earlier, which has been really kind of aggressively pursued since the 1980s in most African countries, we really need to think how we take more seriously studying the state. So a lot of people say, oh, we're going to do a review of policy, and then we're going to see how it doesn't match with practice. Okay, that's an interesting proposition. But when we go into policy, we have to ask really complicated questions about how the state works and the relationship between policy and state making. So one of the things I often tell people is that we have to take very seriously how the technical, political, and bureaucratic rationalities differ. States are heterogeneous. They do not exist all in the same way. Even within, for example, the city of Cape Town, different departments see infrastructure completely differently. So if we don't unpick state formation and the kind of complexities that exist within it, we really kind of stand to lose a lot when we start trying to think about implementation or political will, et cetera. We also need to think about how particularly African states are enrolled in infrastructural projects that are both inward-looking towards their own people and towards exerting sort of and defining power locally, but also performative and kind of extrospective. So we have to see the way in which these projects like that in Mombasa are actually orientated not only towards the constituents of the city themselves, but also towards global communities, international actors, a positioning of the city within a bigger kind of development project. And so when we start to see infrastructure and its governance, not just as something that's taking place locally, but something that's performed internationally, I think it also really shifts our orientation. I'm going to skip this point on infrastructures of the state, but I think the Addis Light Rail is a really good example of something that has both an introspective, looking at itself, making sense of the city itself, and an extrospective, a sort of globally facing orientation. And unless we look at both of those, then we sort of fail to see this project in its entirety. Of course, this project also throws up some challenges, as it was an imposed project developed from really very far from Addis itself, but is also a very heavily used and very much locally liked project. And so these tensions really force us to look at the infrastructural state and even the undemocratic or partially democratic infrastructural state a bit differently. The final point I'll make is about governing with uncertainty. And I think
time is almost run off. Yeah.
Okay,
so just
this is my very last slide.
All right.
My last slide. Don't worry. governing with uncertainty. And so when we talk about planning, we're naturally talking about a speculative practice. We're imagining a future, and this future is happening very quickly. It's happening very quickly because technology is changing. It's happening very quickly because we actually not able to keep pace with the sorts of global processes that we're experiencing. So we are, of course, seeing a shift towards kind of uncertain futures where increasingly we're not able to plan or predict. And I think this presents us with challenges for planning that need to be dealt with in a lot more detail. The example that I use here is from my VREF work. People can take a look at this project that I did with a group of scholars across the continent, looking at the enrollment of informal economies into digital platforms and the way in which this is attracting venture capital to African cities, the datafication of users, the changes towards dark spaces, logistics and warehouses, and a whole lot of things that city officials could not have predicted more than just a few years ago. So this kind of planning with uncertainty presents really a new frontier for thinking about governing infrastructure in a rapidly changing world. Thank you.
Oh, wow. Thank you so much. Would have wished to listen more. It's just short of time, but really good with those examples demonstrating your framework. Thank you very much. I hope Robin is already with us. Robin, are you with us? I know Robin was supposed to join us a little bit late. Is Robin in?
Hi, Margot's
I
here.
think it's Margot.
Oh,
Yeah.
sorry. Yeah,
Margot.
Okay, Margot, good. Let me just introduce you. Thank you very much for joining in. Thank you very much. Margot Robin is an urban geographer with a PhD in planning and politics, located at the School of Geography and Planning at the Cardiff University. Her work is comparative, largely focused on the global south, and has ranged from urban housing, land use management, transit-oriented development to urban governance, mobility, gender, and geographies of care. This has given her the scope to engage with broad conceptual themes of socioeconomic rights, urban sustainability, spatial change, and identity politics and their relationships to the city through comparative studies, including comparisons between Delhi and Joburg and Cairo, Maputo and Gauteng, and the housing employment nexus of the urban youth in Hawassa, Ethiopia, and in Kalangala, South Africa. Her current work looks at intersectionality, temporality, and walking in Dar es Salaam, Swane and Cardiff, and the governance of just urban transitions in South Africa. So you have the floor to give some reflections to this paper presentation.
Thank you so much, Winnie. Much appreciated. So first thing I always say when responding to Liza is that she and I are not actually one and the same person. We are two separate individuals. We do look incredibly similar.
I was going to think that you are the one on the screen. Wow.
I know. It happens all the time, and people confuse us all the time, which I don't mind at all, but I'm sure Liza is terribly upset about. So we just go from there. But Liza, thank you so much for your usual fascinating, insightful set of commentaries. I think I want to pitch my comments about thinking about three kinds of strands that came out of your presentation, which were interrelated and yet quite independent in some ways of each other. So I think the three strands for me that were coming out really strongly were the ideas of politics, scale, and agency. And I think my comments are going to be very much pitched around thinking about those three things in terms of the work that you presented. And in some ways, asking questions, and other ways kind of reflecting back on some of the work that you've done and some of the thinking that I've had as well. So, I mean, first of all, just to say that I absolutely loved your three questions and how you asked them. How is infrastructure governing? Is governance infrastructure, and does infrastructure govern? And I think that these three questions are absolutely core to understanding the nature and relationship of mobility studies and asking questions of open governance in Africa at the moment. And I mean, I think implied within that, but was not perhaps made explicit, was the interrelationship between these things. And for me, that's very much a question of politics itself, is in politics with a small p, thinking about relationships of power, thinking about how we work through these ideas of what happens when different kinds of infrastructure governs. who governs this kinds of infrastructure. And so working in between and through these kinds of questions for me and the interrelationships is a really, really kind of a rich seam to mine as well. And to think through, and I'm sure you've done that as well. And then, I was thinking very much about the idea of infrastructure and how it is such an expression, and you've done this in your own work, of both politics and agency, and who has agency, who has power within these different kinds of groups. And, kind of thinking about what the legacies of certain kinds of colonial and post-colonial acts have been, and how these ideas of power are made very much manifest and material on the landscapes of the cities in which we operate. And to my mind, also thinking about how these carry over into a whole lot of different kinds of activities. Who has access, who has money, who has power, who has, and at what scale? Who is able to navigate their way through these things, and how these then relate back into what was, originally the kind of center and periphery, but now thinking about the kind of financial relationships that exist between multilateral organizations, between the center and the periphery. I'm not being entirely clear here, but what I'm trying to allude to is the relationship, or thinking about the notion of legacy, of how when we think about the expressions of governance, they hark back into previous times, which are very much made manifest into the contemporary situation. And kind of saying that the same thing that's been said very often, that the past has a long shadow, and we see that in the materialities of the cities in which we operate. Mm-hmm. So then, thinking about the kind of 3 points that you were talking about around decolonization and multi-level governance, and I was thinking very hard about this idea of decentralization in the work that I've come across in the places that I've worked. And to large degree, I've often wondered whether decentralization is a myth. And I say this because it seems to appear on paper in a number of different ways. And we hear, oh yes, this function is going to go down. It's going to go to the local level. But when one does a bit of digging, and we all have, that's not what's going on. I mean, what's going on is the fact that actually, yeah, it might appear on paper, but de facto, control is still highly centralized and still sits within the hands of the few, within kind of national government and within central and often liberation parties, as the case may be. So I always want to think about problematizing this idea of decentralization. And then, of course, thinking once again, going back to this question of scale, and thinking about even if decentralization does exist in some ways, thinking about the kind of transcalarity that exists between different scales and different spheres and different tiers of government, and how power works up and down, and how the ability to make decisions is not just a decision often that happens at the national scale, but who and how. What is it being able to affect decision making at a range of different scales that's both working up and down? And I always had in my mind this kind of complex squiggle of a diagram where there's these weird interrelationships between these different tiers, between these different scales. So thinking very hard about decentralization, and also the fact that decentralization often occurs not necessarily just within government, but if it does exist, it kind of moves into odd kind of open actors and odd kinds of places which one doesn't necessarily expect, and then also filters back up again. And I'm thinking here of some of the work that Sylvia Creasy did with Simon Becker, and thinking about how the national is refracted downward, but also how it is refracted upward again into the national. So I was thinking about that. And then within the questions around hybridity and heterogeneity, the questions for me were very much about the politics of, and I think you were very much stating this, the politics of who gets what. And, within systems of heterogeneity and in situations of distribution, and I'm thinking here about the kind of classic splintered kind of infrastructure and splintering urbanism and those kinds of ideas of who gets what and why it's so kind of heterogeneous. But then also thinking about the questions that go back to the politics and back to questions of agency are the questions about why. Why do these people get that? Why do those people get this? What is the politics of what's going on? So I'm always really curious about the questions of why, and I know you dig into that quite a lot in your own work. And then once again, thinking about scale, in terms of the idea of hybridity and heterogeneity. Sorry, I'm trying to read my very scribbly notes.
Time, 1 more minute or 2.
1 more minute. Okay,
max.
then what I'll go back into, then I'll talk about the idea of statecraft. I love the idea of statecraft. I'm always fascinated by digging into the black box of the state. It is always so opaque. No matter what society you move in, no matter where you operate, the state is in of itself deeply opaque, deeply difficult to understand. And I think the work that, de Sardan has done, Legels, Fouchard, Buffon, Claire's work, and thinking about the ethnography of the state is a really important place to start. And what that allows us to do is to think about these ideas of politics, agency, and scale, and the kind of porosity of the state, who is able to enter into the state, who is able to have their views influence the state, and then equally, how is the state kind of operating and being able to embed its ideas and entrench them within society. And I don't believe that I think that's a synthetic kind of schism to say that there's a difference between state and society. I think they're mutually kind of constituting at all times. But I do think that it's interesting to understand the relationships between those who understand themselves outside of the state and those who understand themselves to be within the state, and the porosity and the nature of engagement between these different actors, and who has agency, who has power, and and at what scale they're able to operate. So I think I'll leave it there, if that's okay. But thank you, that was fascinating. And as usual, I want to talk to you more and more.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Margot. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, I think it's very good for the entire team, not just Liza herself, because there are a lot of questions about governance, and really, this is how governance works. We will continue asking questions and creating different pathways for engaging with the debate. So the debate continues, and I encourage everybody else to continue with engaging with some insights from both the commentator and from the presenter as we head to the last presentation, which is going to be by Wilma Chito. So Wilma, you can be loading your PowerPoints as I introduce you. Wilma is an associate professor currently working as a senior researcher in the Center for Research and Planning. Okay, at least the PowerPoints are coming. I might be talking to somebody who left. Thank you, it's coming. In the Department of Geography and Environmental Studies at the University of Zambia. Wilma is an urban geographer and a planner with over 30 years teaching and research experience. Her research specializations are urban geography, water and environment management, and transport. And her publications cover inclusivity in transport infrastructure, walking as a means of transport, informality in cities, climate change and cities, small town development, urban flooding, water and sanitation in particular. She led a VREF MARC project on mainstreaming inclusivity in urban mobility, related projects in Lusaka and Nairobi, and she is currently involved in a project titled African Transitions to Energy Systems, which is abbreviated as AFTA, funded by the Climate Compatible Growth. So Wilma, the floor is yours. Share with us your insights.
Thank you very much, Winnie, and thanks to VREF for this opportunity. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, and the PowerPoints are also good.
All right. So as you can see, my title is Mainstreaming Inclusivity in Mobility Planning and Governance in Sub-Saharan Africa. And we're assessing urban mobility projects in Zambia and Kenya. And as I've said, it's from the project, the VREF funded project that we did in 2021, 2022, or 2021, I can't remember. That was the team. The two ladies are here, the gentleman is not here. And that basically was my start in transport research. Well, to start with, I'll just briefly give an overview. Africa is rapidly urbanizing. And if you're a leader in Africa, you want your city to grow in a way that will allow mobility. And politically, as we've heard from Liza, they're politically effective or visible projects, and these mostly are roads, big buildings. So we found, fortunately for us at the time of our study, there were two what we'd call mega projects. There was the one in Kenya, the expressway in Kenya, Nairobi, and the Zambia, the one in Lusaka was the decongestion project. And so fortunately for us, which is rare, these were projects which were moving at a high pace. And for the one in Lusaka, it even finished while we were still doing our write-up. The one in Kenya, Nairobi, also finished in good time. So that gave us an opportunity to look at completed projects. You know, in Africa, projects also take long. You can end up with white elephants which are not complete. This is just a picture of one of the phases of the Nairobi project. The objectives of the study were to explore the inclusiveness of governance concept in urban mobility projects in the cities of Nairobi and Lusaka. And I think today I'll really outline the first objective, which was to interrogate the inclusive governance concept in transport policies and regulation in Kenya and Zambia. So to do this, we also carried out a stakeholder analysis of urban mobility. Sorry, I can't see. And we undertook an inclusive analysis of urban transport projects along the whole project cycle. Because when we looked at literature, inclusivity is not only at the beginning, it's not only at the end, it has to be present in the whole project cycle from conceptualization to completion. So we tried to analyze how inclusive the two projects had been in the two cities. And we also looked at comparing both cities in terms of best practices, and I think I'll speak to this at the end. And we also identified opportunities for scaling up inclusive best practices. That's a picture of the Lusaka project before it was completed. I won't spend time on this. I think many of you have heard this before. So the Lusaka project was worth $289 million US. The key agencies were the Ministry of Local Government, and money was given by Exim Bank of India, which funded 85% of the project. And it really was constructing 4 grade separators or flyover bridges in different parts of the city. And it completed in 2021, having started in August 2020. So it was quite fast for projects, especially as we've seen in Lusaka. The projects can take years, but this one was done in a hurry. The Nairobi project, it's part of a longer term project, which I think gave it more, it gave it more time for people to protest and people to question it. So the conceptualization of the Nairobi Expressway was as far back as 1997. So it's something that has been in the pipeline. And if you see it now, it's really impressive. And it shows that a lot of thought went into it. It cost about 62 billion shillings. It was funded by China and the bridge company. So in both projects, there's an external factor, which is why I mentioned the externality of influences, which sometimes governments are unable to do away with. And for the difference with this one is being operated as a public-private partnership. So some benefit is expected to come out of the Nairobi Expressway. So our methodology, we had a total sample size of 913. So we looked at the communities around the various points of the two projects, and we had focus group discussions, and we had key informant interviews. I won't spend time on this. So we tried to conceptualize inclusivity. What is it really about? So we found the Gupta model. We used the Gupta model, and we also used the OECD framework. The Gupta model comes from concepts of inclusive development, where it's argued that the question is, how inclusive are these projects, or how inclusive is development in terms of benefiting all segments of society, starting from the lowest to the highest. And then the OECD framework is used to ensure that infrastructure projects or programs are cost effective, they're done in an affordable manner, and the processes are trusted by the larger society. And we looked at the 10 preconditions that are provided in OECD, and we borrowed heavily from the questionnaire used by OECD because we didn't want to reinvent the wheel. And since we're doing an assessment, we wanted to use a methodology that has already been tried and tested. So that's the OECD infrastructure governance cycle. So first you evaluate the infrastructure needs, then you have decisions and prioritization of infrastructure, then infrastructure project preparation, construction, operation, delivery, and maintenance. So in all these phases, we tried to ask whether the community was either included or they were aware of certain of these phases and whether they were happy with the level of participation. So those are the 10 frameworks, the 10 parts of the framework from OECD. So the vision for infrastructure, manage the integrity and corruption threats, choose how to deliver the infrastructure, ensure good regulatory design, integrate consultation process, coordinate infrastructure policy across levels of government, guard affordability and value for money, generate and analyze and disclose useful data, make sure the assets perform throughout its life, and public infrastructure needs to be resilient. So the questionnaire had aspects of all these 10 points. And the study was a comparative case study. So we chose 2 case studies as as I've mentioned, and we collected data, had direct observation, looked at a lot the documentation. In the case of the Lusaka one, the documentation was sparse because it was it was conceptualized very late in the day. There was very little write-up, even online. Whereas compared to the Nairobi case, since it was an older situation, there was more data. There were even court cases, so there was more information on the Nairobi project. So what is inclusivity? Inclusivity is the act of not excluding any member of society. And sometimes in transport, since governments are in a hurry to provide what they think is needed by society, they don't feel it's important to include members of society, especially when it comes to mobility and large projects, because they want to show that they've done something that is very visible. But there's a need for mobility and accessibility and travel concerns of everyone in society to be included. And you have different types of excluded populations. You have the differently abled, children, women have different requirements, but these are overlooked and often poorly understood by the policymakers. So we did a stakeholder mapping. Those are the different, I won't read them. The different government institutions or agencies. And as you can see, the number of agencies on the Kenyan side are more. And this shows that there's it's more developed. The transport sector, transport actions are more developed and I think more active in Nairobi, whereas on the Zambian side, there are fewer, and most of them are like ZEMA is an environmental agency. It's really a peripheral agency. Then we looked at businesses. So apart from government, we looked at businesses who are stakeholders. We also looked at the general population. So that's just the stakeholder mapping. This is just the demographics. The figures that we found. I'm not going to spend time on that. Just to say that we did manage, we made a deliberate effort to get women involved as well. So to balance the statistics at the end. And education-wise, the responses were coming from people who are at least educated. They have some formal education. So it's not people who can't read if something is in a newspaper. So they are able to check if there's an advert, there are people who were able to read adverts. So the finding, I don't know, I'm doing on time. So we found that we, in terms of involvement, there were more people involved in Nairobi. And as I said earlier, it's probably also due to the length of time that this project had been in the pipeline. So people kept on hearing about it and they developed opinions over it. Whereas in the Zambian project, it's only 4% who reported that there people need to be involved. And respondents were also asked how citizens should be involved in infrastructure projects. And the three highest responses were people felt involvement should be in planning and prioritization. They should also be involved in the evaluation of infrastructure needs. And they should also be involved in infrastructure project preparation. So people prioritized, and I think if you look at that, they are aware that people need to be involved even at the planning stage. So the general population needs to be included at the planning stage. And respondents were also asked at which stages should be involved. The three top responses were in the decision and prioritization of infrastructure. And as I said, most governments are in a hurry. They want visibility and they want to be able to spend money. If money has been, it's a grant, they want to be able to spend that money quickly. So they usually skip these phases. We also looked at awareness, because if people are aware, then they're able to either protest or have reactions. And we found that awareness was higher in Nairobi. And again, this could be due to the fact that it was in the pipeline for a longer time. 93% were aware in Nairobi, and in Zambia it was 85%. Of course, it was visible that there were 4 flyover bridges, so people could see them. And I think that is when people became aware, not that they knew about the project before it happened. And we also asked how common it was to involve citizens in infrastructure, in the infrastructure governance cycle of urban mobility projects in the communities. And in Kenya, people felt it was very common to involve citizens, and I've already spoken to this. In Zambia, it was only 4%. Involvement being non-existent was higher in Zambia. 54% felt it's not common. It's non-existent, actually. Rare, Kenyans felt 44% felt it was rare to involve, and 38% in Zambia felt it was rare to involve, and then that percentage didn't know. And then we also asked if the interviewees were aware of any road project which was halted or changed or abandoned, because this gives the community a sense of power to show them that if you speak out, something can be halted or it can be changed. And we found that there was a similarity. Most people have hardly ever heard of anything being halted, but it was higher in Zambia, surprisingly. People had heard of a road being halted or changed or abandoned because of feedback, and in Nairobi, it was 11%. And this shows that if citizens are given are made aware, they can make changes. But it's often the fact that they're not aware of these projects and they're not involved. This is just
your time, Chito, has run out. So try to do it in the next 2 minutes if you can.
Okay, yeah. So basically, the community was aware of the needs and the benefits of involvement. Most of them said there was a need for citizens to be aware, citizens to be involved in both projects. So this was the Nairobi data, this was the Zambia data. Best practices, according to the cycle, managing infrastructure, stakeholder engagement. The citizens know what the best practices are, and they are aware of the best practices on the most part, because these are in the high 80s and high 90s. So in both cities, citizens were aware of the best practices. This is just showing what some of the key informants from Nairobi said. I'll just read the top one. Conduct proper public participation, involve local professionals in government projects. That was a feeling from one of the key informants from Kenya. So generally, you find that even technocrats are excluded. So inclusivity is not only about the citizens, but it's also about people in offices who are sidelined when a big project comes. And you find they say, I don't know anything. I'm in the engineering, road engineering, and I don't know anything. Finally, reflections on key findings. Citizens have reached a level of awareness, and it may not all be from the planning phase. They might become aware when they see things going up, and both sides felt that the project met the car users' needs. So when they said, when they answered the question, do you feel that this project has met the users' needs, they were referring to vehicle users and not NMT users. And I think this is a study that needs to be carried out. And in both cities, citizens felt that consultation is very important. The takeaways, I think Zambia can learn from the Kenyan case, which is a PPP. So there's a benefit, and it will eliminate the burden on fiscal budgets, whereas ours is a loan in Zambia, and we have to pay back that loan. And the Kenyan model is a larger scale, more long-term, and it has taken, I think, future demand is quite big. Whereas the Zambia model, I can see ourselves demolishing and widening in future because it was really done in a hurry. And there were aspects of the Kenyan project which were delayed due to public concerns. So here we had citizen involvement, and it even went to litigation. Walkways were not part of the major project. We're talking about walking earlier. So certain aspects, certain users were left out, definitely. It was not inclusive. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Wilma. That was really interesting. And I'm glad you were able to give us the pathways and looking forward, which is very good. Now I want to call upon Vivian Meli. Meli will give some observations in form of comment. Vivian Meli is a social anthropologist and senior lecturer at the University of Zang in Cameroon, Central Africa. His scientific interests are in the areas of marginalized social categories. This includes issues of mobility on urban margins, urban-rural connections, governance, and inclusion in urban transport. His interest is in transport research and related actions, which dates back to more than 19 years. We're focusing on transport governance. This particular commitment goes back and through financial support of the IFRD as part of the assessment of road safety issues in rural road transport in Cameroon. He has also been engaged in training and dissemination of knowledge with Sub-Saharan Africa Transport Policy Program and the Global Road Safety Facility. In collaboration with Catholic University of Louvain, he has carried out research on transport technologies in African cities. He's also part of VREF project focusing on urban transport governance and inclusion in Africa. He has been part of that project, so he's quite the right person to engage with this discussion. Meli, the floor is yours.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Winnie. Good afternoon to everyone.
Good afternoon.
I'm sorry, I have to switch off my camera because of
No problem.
network.
No problem.
Thank you. Yes, I want to congratulate Wilma and his team. I think they did a very important work, and particularly pleased with the direction she has taken, in particular the inclusion in the planning and of mobility and connectivity project in the cities, particularly in Lusaka and in Nairobi in Kenya. Her analysis are based on the project cycles of expressway in Kenya and Lusaka congestion project in Zambia. The interests of inclusion here for me have twofold. The first one is that the consideration of inclusion in the design process of mobility and urban connectivity project in Africa, this consideration is all the more original, and that inclusion process are most often initiated after the project have been completed. I think Winnie and her team invite us to address inclusion at all levels of the urban planning process, in particular to anticipate crisis, disorder, and urban violence. When inclusion is assessed after construction after construction and when the infrastructure are used, it is often quite late to make up for shortcoming. And when this is the case, the modified infrastructure no longer guarantee the quality of the hoped for face of the city. This also entail additional cost for the city governance. And we know that the crisis of financial resources in sub-Saharan Africa is often the reason for the existence of not inclusivity and sustainability in the cities. In other words, the construction of urban infrastructure that do not take inclusion into account is a factor of amplifying urban crisis and even disorder and violence. The second interest for me is that the consideration that Wilma and Shitin give to the stakeholder participation in the planning process for urban infrastructure projects. I think the participation here is a democratic value in our contemporary society, where it's no longer a question of making decisions for or instead of others. Participation here is a factor of preserving social equilibrium. In this sense, it makes it possible to consider all the direct and indirect stakeholders, whatever their stature and capacity. This requires new urban governance technologies that enable us to anticipate urban dynamics, particularly the control of social demographic and economic dynamic. In other words, the governance of urban mobility must mobilize all the actors involved without transport being considered as a closed entity, but open and in interaction with other sectors of the production and the functioning of the cities. This is the first, let's say, I realize, let's say, some little weaknesses in the proposition. The first one is that the presentation does not make clear with inclusion indicator which have been assessed during the research. The second one is that the different category of stakeholder could be more detailed, including informal categories and those on the urban merging. We know how far informal sector is important in African countries, even and very particularly in the transport sector. The inclusion of the public and private sector and the population seems limited to me as it was presented in the world. The third weakness is that the comparative perspective does not seem to be emphasis in all the analysis. I think it will be important to make those comparisons, and those comparisons have to come out. And this is another lack that I identify is that the best practices announced in the objective of the work in relation with inclusion in each country are not really clarified in the work. I think those weaknesses do not affect very importantly the quality of the work. And I think it will be important for the team to add those details which can give an important legitimacy to the work. I can also identify that I think the methodology was not really clear to see who was interviewed, how many person was interviewed, and so on and so forth. Maybe it could be in the whole text, but it was important for us to have it. I think to end, I have some reflection that we have to go further and promote the notion of the right of the city, which means the consideration and participation of every citizen in the future of the city in order to reduce inequality, limit form of segregation, and encourage the emergence of a more inclusive and democratic cities. The right of the city called for the co-production of the former contribution that we have with colleague of Côte d'Ivoire was on the co-production of the governance in the city. And the right of the city called for that co-production of the city through sharing governance process in which all stakeholders are taken into account in the designing, implementation, and monitoring evaluation process in urban governance in general and urban mobility infrastructure project in particular. This means that the central governance or the local governance is no longer the only actor of urban governance, but is one of them in a negotiated balance, including actors from the private sector, civil society organization, informal actors and organizations, short-term minority in the area, project residents, structure affected by the project, and potential user, etc., etc. This holistic consideration of stakeholders in the planning process of urban infrastructure before, during, and after construction is a major factor in the resilience of a more connected city for the well-being of all city dwellers. This, dear colleague, this is my understanding of the contribution that Wilma and his team did to the research on urban infrastructure, mobility, and governance. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Melly, and your English is very good. So is very good. That's excellent. I think we've really had a great afternoon, and a lot of dimensions have come up. And what I take home as we head to the last part of this process is the many dimensions of planning and governance and the definitions and how people conceptualize them. We were very glad to listen to Liza, framing it, and then we've had a lot of issues of complexity and a lot of questions being raised that we still need to delve deep in, basically telling us that this is really an ongoing issue. None of us has a pathway, a real pathway for how we ensure that planning and governance is done. But a key thing coming out is how do we engage citizens? If we are doing that expressway in Nairobi, or whether we are doing that decongestion in whichever city or Zambia, how are we engaging people and whose interest prevails? Issues of urgency. How do we understand the different actors that are engaged in all this murky process? And are we able to consult each and every agency and get an outcome that gets us to what what Melly has just concluded by telling us that we need to go further and promote right to the city for all. And this right to the city for all is quite in line with just cities that we have also been looking at. And I think since this series, we've had almost 2 very key framings on just cities. We were even lucky to roll it out with Martens himself. So we had the very person that we all have been quoting actually highlighting for us how he sees it, which was really great for opening up of this engagement. And as we continue to end it, we see still a reference to Martens and a reference to so many other OECD people who have tried to frame these concepts. And I hope that going forward, we will also continue framing, especially as scholars who are in researching in the South. Is there a sync with what framings that have been done by other authors from elsewhere? There is always this debate about some frameworks don't fit a particular region and fits another region. So these debates will continue with us, and we are lucky that we have VREF with us always alongside that helps us to convene, to continue with the debate as we continue to identify more threads and pathways into understanding planning and governance. So what I want to do, I don't want to get back to asking questions on people raising hands. We want to get back to where you will just switch off your cameras and you will get back to work, just the way we began it. So this time around, we want you to kind of think around the topic we've had, your own views and perspectives, of what we've had, and so that you are able to share with us at a very individual level in the platform there, and then we can see what's coming up before we conclude. So I'll basically raise 2 questions, begin with one, then we run through the chat. So you can just put it on, and then we come to the second one. The first one will be, what are your takeaway from this forum, what we've had? And then the second one is going to be about, are there some gaps in this debate, in this discussion? Could there have been some expectations you came expecting and you didn't hear us articulate them? Those again. So we'll have two strands. The first strand is, what is your takeaway? And what would you want to give us as a last word? If you don't have a takeaway, I guess you could have a last word for us on this topic. Otherwise, we will go to the second one again, and you can give us, we can hear of what you would like discussed further later on, or because we are on this. Although this is our last series, we are on this. We are on these topics going forward. We will keep convening to engage, because scholars don't stop. They continue engaging. So let's get to our first topic. Let's see you type out for us some of your overall views and perspectives on this topic of planning and governance. And then we can get to the second one. I think we'll give the first one just about maybe 3 minutes, 5, and then we go to the next one. So let us get to be writing on the chat. This is, we are going digital now, trying to remove totally the interactivity of listening to each other. Okay. I'm not beginning to see an active chat. I hope the teacher has not set a wrong question. There are many times when teachers have set wrong questions and the students have not understood the questions. So you need to be putting as you're giving us your perspectives and overall views on this topic. Jane?
Winnie, I think
Yeah,
a lot
I
of
can
people
just-
were commenting the whole way through. So
Yeah,
people were
absolutely.
engaging throughout
Absolutely.
the whole process.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
It's been a very active chat, and I think this is really exciting.
Yeah.
You didn't even need the prompting to do all this
Yeah.
chatting. I would urge people to maybe share a new idea or a new
Yeah.
thought. I mean, I've gotten a lot of new thoughts, especially conceptually today. One of my favorites is the myth of decentralization, actually. So share your new perspectives.
All our perspectives were well covered, maybe. The new perspectives, yeah. Some reflections on this topic. I guess there were quite a number of dimensions covered in this topic. It was quite elaborate.
I can make a comment right here. I really like Gladys's comment in the chat that frameworks and theories and transport and governments really differ in the global north and global south, and the way to really tweak this and see the implications of it for the type of practices that needs to be encouraged and locally grounded in African cities is I think that's a really important issue.
Okay. I hope there was this issue of, I think is Ariana, about transport is context dependent. It looks different in each place. When designing transport with a social justice lens, we should take into account this context. So it's like one would assume that if you take what we were being told in the keynote about engineers having that linear approach and planning for cars, so the assumption is that if you take a justice approach, probably the outlook would be very different. I like that. I like Eliza. That's a very interesting one. Building on Harry, if we cannot understand something, how can we intervene? That's a very, very good one. Harry, say something about that, please. Break the ice. Harry?
Well, no, Winnie's, there's so much to say, and people made such fantastic comments. I was just about to type, but now you give me the opportunity to talk on the comment that you highlighted. Transport looks different in each place from one of our colleagues, and terms like the global and north and global south are so crude, and I think it tricks us into seeing patterns that maybe aren't there.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah, I quite agree with you. Yeah, those concepts don't help us much. Probably we just need to dig deeper into our context and share what we have compared to other regions. But basically categorize those categories on their own doesn't help much.
Good point. Agree on that one. Learning all the time.
The expressway, Eliza, the expressway is being used. Yeah, I think there is people using the expressway now is very active, and some of us now go to the airport at a quarter the time that we used to have. It's a little bit expensive. Since they rolled it out, they've they've increased the cost of going through it. It has had one increment. I hope maybe in another 3-4 years they might increase it again. And in terms of justice and inclusion, people are really saying that is very exclusive, because it's not inclusive, because you have to pay for it. And if they are increasing the cost, then the likelihood of who can use it is going to be a very marginalized group. that can use it. Because
isn't that the
use
whole point, Winnie? I thought the whole point was to create something that wouldn't have a lot of people using it, so that the people who pay don't get stuck in traffic. I'm not justifying it. I'm just saying it wouldn't be an expressway if it wasn't exclusive. Again,
No,
not
but
justifying it, but I think that is what the whole point of what they've created
No.
is to circumvent the city.
I think that's not the first framework why it was created. It was to actually to move people faster across that corridor, especially the airport, and also towards the end where you have many international agencies like UN. So I don't think the initial is that makes it costly to reduce the number of people going on it. And that's why the debate on how much it should be charged was really intense at one point. And it started very modestly, but that right now is increasing. Probably now they are going to what your argument. Now is when they are saying they need to increase it because we are more up there. But it's never full, it's never congested.
Not
Actually,
full yet.
when it began, it was like, is this really a worth investment? Something like that.
I took it the very first day it opens, and I was the only one on it because you couldn't pay with M-Pesa at the time. I was the only one on it, but now I'm glad to know at least somebody's using it.
Yeah, now
my comment on the policy wasn't to say that we shouldn't be, engaging with policy, but that, we're often asked in even very short-term projects to make recommendations. And, so we jump over a lot of steps, even though we ourselves feel like we either don't really understand how policies work, or we don't understand how the state works, or we don't even understand the context that we're researching, but we still make policy proposals. And so I guess my question is, how can we be more careful when we sort of move through to that practical phase? I mean, we all want to be useful and impactful, but what does that require?
Yeah, I like your hint of this making policy. Somebody once said that we should just stop making these policies, because we make those policies and we don't give good consideration to the practitioners and what it will take. Our perspective of policy recommendations does not dig deeper into these governance issues that we've dug deep today on. Look at the presentation of Nyachio with all those parameters. I mean, who considers all those parameters as a scholar when you are skewed into your narrow area and then you are giving recommendations for policy? So the debate of whether we should be recommending, usually in recent years, I think I call them pathways, directions for some pathways that can be taken as opposed to policy recommendations. Because pathways you can consider them or not. Because if you're recommending policies, a different ballgame. But that's a story for another day. I see we are left with only 7 minutes. So Jane, I think we need to now shift into our ending of the entire series, which should be a little bit special than as usual. So when I take it back to you, I take it back to the team at VREF as conceptualizers of this celebration, which is ending today. We had almost a 3-4 months celebration. Yes. Thank you, Jane.
We have indeed. Thank you very much, Winnie. And thank you to all the presenters, the discussants, and also the very lively participants in the chat. This has been a really interesting session. I think it's been such a fascinating blend of empirically oriented studies, really on the ground, getting in all the information there, and the conceptual approach, which is asking the question, what does all this mean? How can we interpret it? And all the nuances that have come up in the discussion. So thank you so much. I think it's been very inspiring today. So and I'd also like to say that, this has been a series of extended 3-hour research forums to kind of commemorate the fact that the MAC program has been going on since 2019. And the idea with this was to identify some of the key themes that have been particularly dwelt on or discussed within the various projects. We have a large number of projects, 40 or 50 in the program during that time. And three of the three themes we talked about was first equity in September, then informal and shared mobility in October, where we also brought in the informal and shared mobility program people from there. And this one, the third one, is transport planning and governance. And all three of these these forums have only been kind of the top of the iceberg in terms of all the work that has been done in these themes. So I'd really urge you to go out on the webpage, see what's there. We're also going to be posting overviews of pretty much all the publications that have come out of the program. And I'm not saying this because this is the end of the program. The program will indeed be continuing, but we will not be continuing in the form of smaller projects as we have done up until now. We're going to have different types of formats moving forward. So I would just like to say thank you to all of you for participating. Thank you, of course, to Winnie, who is our absolutely fantastic moderator and guiding us through this, also helping in the planning and helping us with all the decisions and the formats. So that's just wonderful. And for those of you who think that, oh no, does this celebration mean it's the end of the VREF MAC program? No, it's not. So don't be worried. We're still around and we're still going to be in touch with all of you. So I would just like to say that. I think first we should have a round of applause to thank Winnie, especially for her great job here. Please turn on your cameras and your noise so we can hear you clapping from Zambia to Scotland. And I think it's been a wonderful time. Henrik, would you like to say any words as we wrap up here? You go ahead. I think we have a minute left.
Oh, just very quickly thanking you all for excellent webinar. It's been fantastic to be here today, and so many new ideas coming up. That's a handful for us to pick up and see what we can do about it. But I'll leave that to Jane. So, but so thanks very much, and yeah, and take good care of yourselves, and a special thanks to Winnie, of course. But yeah, and have a good evening.
Thanks
very much, and let all the discussions continue for sure.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.